Okay, so I think that I found an angle where it won't defocus. Hallelujah for that. And so I'm going to do a basic sketch and then use my pastels this time. Now I'm going to start sketching out a dragon. This is not, this is just one particular dragon who actually is in the comic, although this may not be how his final form looks when that happens, since it's going to be a slightly different medium as far as I can tell. But this is one of the ones that, again, I base this dude off of the Da Vinci's dragons because, gosh, those guys are gorgeous. I have several different dragons who end up going through the story at various points. Not near the beginning, because at the beginning they're just more doing their own thing on Earth. But the later dragons end up with some interesting conundrums as they face Tai and... oh my gosh, why am I mixing them up? Kai and Tia. Kai and Tia as they go along with their adventures. The dragons are from the more ethereal plane. They essentially are my equivalent of celestial type beings. They are based a little bit more on the Eastern idea of a dragon, with them being mini deities that can control the water and elements of the sky. They do storms and clouds and rivers, etc. These guys are massively powerful. I do have some other dragons that are on Earth, but they don't show up so much in the story as they aren't as relevant to what's going on. But these guys are here to help humanity when they are on Earth, and they attempt to be the kind of guardians of culture as much as they can. Now, one of the things that I find very interesting about the more Eastern type dragons, not just the fact that they're a lot more highly regarded than those within the European mythologies, because, well, European mythologies tend to demonize dragons in general, and I have a bit more of a story that I like to build with dragons in general. Gosh. Why? There we go, that's the right thickness. Okay. So, dragons have always had a more complicated thing surrounding them. There's all of those, if you look, you will find a dragon in every culture type things, not just in sites, but honestly in a surprising amount of truth. There's a surprising amount of truth to that, and the idea that at some point there were dragons and we killed them. Obviously there's the potential of dinosaur bones, which people love to point out, especially since a lot of the Chinese dragons came from the same areas that there are currently actively awesome archaeological dig areas. And the fun of being able to say that dinosaurs were dragons obviously makes me happy, because dinosaurs were my first love and dragons are my second. So having them put together both makes it fun, because to me that means I get to draw more scaly furries and more fluffers. But it has the one problem for me of there's so much variety that there's no reason why there shouldn't have been some sort of dragon. And that's the thing that ends up coming up a lot more of the time than anything else. Now, whether a dragon is or was or whatever is a literal creature or more of a basically an abstraction of an idea. Like, a river itself is long and languorous, and the way that a dragon is drawn in a lot of the more eastern lines and ways, it's either a long, shapely creature that very much mimics the rivers that they are supposed to control, or whether it's more of the blocky, like the dragon lions, and has some sort of, let's get that there, whether it has some sort of more squared and chunky shape. It usually has something to do with what they are supposed to be and supposed to do. The dragon lions tend to be some sort of guardians. They're supposed to be built and tough, and frankly, you look at a Tibetan Mastiff and you're like, oh, look. Whether Tibetan Mastiffs were based on dragon lions or whether dragon lions are based on Tibetan Mastiffs is a chicken and an egg scenario where we just don't know. Speaking of the chicken and egg scenario, I used to think I had the answer to that. The answer was the egg, obviously. But the question, because, lizards obviously had eggs way before chickens. But if the question is, did the chicken egg or the chicken come first, the answer would actually be the chicken, because the chicken comes first genetically before it can lay a chicken egg, because the egg laid by its pre-chicken ancestor before the genetic mutation that created a chicken means that it's a chicken. But if you just say, did the chicken or the egg come first, the answer is the egg came first. But chicken or the chicken egg, the chicken came first. And so the question gets confused just a little bit more. And yet at the same time a little bit more clear. I don't know. The chicken and the egg is one of those things that has always bothered me, because I am a biologist at heart and I always felt like I had the answer. But then I got the multiple viewpoints thing where it's like, when they first asked this was sometime around I think it's medieval era. That was a time when they didn't really have any biological sciences. That was a time when they were trying to figure stuff out based on Greek philosophy, which you don't necessarily need evidence to philosophize. Like, literally, there were a couple philosophers that would basically say, I don't care about your evidence, the logic makes more sense if this is true, ABC. And so that's one of those questions that has not really had a cultural impact on me as much, just because of the era we live in. And I don't know, has it ever bothered you guys what the chicken and the egg question really means? Speaking of eggs, I still find it very interesting. Did any of you grow up with the Dragonology books? With, what was it? It's not Sir Francis Drake, as funny as that would be. But it is a fictionalized account of a dragon tracker, and putting some really cool biological and environmental stuff on them, including making basically a type of weavern for rocks, although I still find it entertaining to find, as in the African and Pacific rock, the giant bird that can sweep away an elephant in its tusks. I mean, in its tusks? In its talons. There we go. Again, when I'm drawing, sometimes my words don't come out right. But I like the idea of a rock more, especially since we have more evidence of birds of that size, even if there were some that were flightless, such as the terror birds, and then there's creatures like the golden eagle, who it's just like, you're huge. Why are you so big? I don't think it could carry off an elephant, a golden eagle, but they are majestic birds, and you can imagine seeing something that's that size, or that's something even bigger than that, flying away with a cow. Do a basic undershadow green for that on the tail back there. I'm gonna get out the blue. Alright. But where was I? I think chicken and the egg. My point with that was going to be that it's interesting that the Eastern dragon mythologies tend to have a pearl associated with the dragons. And the dragonology books used the idea that that pearl was actually a dragon egg. And I found that very fascinating, even though I didn't find it necessarily probable. It is one of those things that it's like oh, well, it could be, and that would be cool, but why? I mean, why not, but why? If dragons are dinosaur-esque, then yes, they would hatch from eggs, and they would be probably fairly darn large, and probably somewhere around a tan or white, kind of like most modern eggs are. Whether they were leathery or hard, probably hard just because of the size, but I wouldn't be surprised with a soft python-like one either. Pythons being probably the closest thing we have to a dragon-type thing, something still a little cold-blooded but loves water, something that is at times warm-blooded, because pythons are weird like that and awesome like that, and something that has little round pearl-like eggs. So I like that connection between the idea of pythons and dragons as the river guardians, but it's far more fun as well to draw dragons as they are described. Now the more Chinese dragon is described as having the end of its tail like an ox, which I use as it has a fluff, and talons like a bird, like a, well, eagle, and legs like an ox, horns like a deer, and scales like a carp. It's a really interesting way that they describe them, kind of chimera-esque, but in the end it ends up with either something quite beautiful or something quite horrifying, or something where you can almost see where they were going with it, but it just doesn't make sense in either modern context or with the animals that have not gone extinct. Because some creatures, it's just like, let's take the manticore for example. It yells with a human voice. It has a face rather like a man. It has barbs down its back, and it has a body like a lion. Now, if you take that barbs down its back, and instead of saying barbs like literally scorpion-like barbs, and instead go Oh, you know what else a count would look like a barb? Stripes. It looks like massive thorns reaching down the body, and face like a man. Have you seen a tiger's eyes? You can see the intelligence in them, and that's a little bit more what I think of whenever I think of a manticore. Is this thing is a tiger. This is something that bays in the night, then sounds like... Have you ever stayed at the zoo late and heard around 5 or 6 p.m., depending on the time of year, heard the sound of a tiger just whoa, just baying is the only word I can really think of. Baying into the night and calling out its territory. Because it's a rather melancholy sound. And I can imagine somebody who had never heard that before thinking that it was a man wounded calling out for help in the middle of the night. Let's get a few more scales on there. Now, I'm not really drawing a Kieran, so I don't have to do 5 colors, but I do enjoy adding a little bit more color to my dragons so that they pop off the page a little more. Though red might not be necessarily the best shader of all time. Alright. So, I have long loved to watch what it is that things really look like. I still think one of my favorites is the Hercules, Puflios. What is man with the chimera? Chimeras are the interesting one. It's not Perseus. My goodness, this is gonna bother me. And the Pegasus. Blank and the Pegasus. Bellerophon. There we go. Bellerophon. Probably mangling that name. But Bellerophon and the Pegasus go off to fight the Chimera. And the Chimera is a massive creature that has a lion's mane and head. It has a goat head in the middle of its back. It has a snake for a tail. And it belches fire, right? Now, whenever I think of that, and I may be wrong, obviously, but I always think of an American bison. Think about it. It belches fire. Have you seen a bison breathing in the cold air? Have you seen it smoke bellowing out of its mouth, essentially, as that steam from its warm breath hits the cold air? And then tail like a snake. They have one of the most paintbrush-looking tails I have ever seen, and it whipping back and forth very much reminds of a snake or a lizard whipping its head back and forth, waiting for prey. The goat on the back of a lion's head, look at the face of a bison on that massive, fluffy mane, essentially. I mean, what else would you call that but a mane if that was the only thing you had seen? It has a fluffy, big mane in the middle of its head. And right there, smack down the center, is a long face with what looks like goat horns. It could easily be, in my opinion, especially since that one is one of the Greek myths that is so disconnected from all of the other people and heroes of mythology, since Bellerophon basically just falls to his death and his story's over. Pegasus flies up, he's earned his eternal rest or whatever, and goes up and lives in the stables of Olympus for the rest of his life. Probably making many more sons and daughters to create a species. But the chimera itself, the idea of someone either Greek or someone from another culture who the story got passed down from, let's say maybe Norse. And I know it's way farther back than we've found evidence yet of anyone being in the Americas, but I mean, people were here over 10,000 years ago. We're pretty sure about that at the minimum. The evidence of having just oral traditions that were passed down, I mean, it's not evidence, it's circumstantial evidence at best, but I am led to believe that that is potentially a thing. I can totally see a bison being described as, well, it's this thing, it's got goat horns and a mane and it breathes smoke and it was terrorizing this village, going easily to, and it had a goat head and it had a lion head and it whipped its tail like a snake and it breathed fire, and then that just quickly escalating into it had a goat head and a lion head, its tail was made out of a snake and it was breathing fire and smoke and it was 10 feet tall and it was, needed a flying horse to defeat it. Yeah! That's something you can see happening in oral tradition. It's something that happens all the time as far as we can tell. But the idea that it may have started from something a little bit more, well, American is interesting because there is a long history of us finding more and more ancient times that people have made it to America and not necessarily known what they found. Columbus was by far not the first person who'd ever found America, and he was not the last. Well, obviously with that one, I'm in America. Hello. Near, 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 near. But if we are to just accept every single myth as it is, then that's losing some of the culture of it and forgetting that this was, in most cases, an oral history originally. An oral history that was passed down by the people who heard it and passed on by the people who wanted to impress people as well. And it was passed on in storytelling contests, passed on in times when the people were down or people were stuck inside in the histories. And the fact that we didn't get it written down for a long time, because I mean, most of our Grecian stories are old. Even Homer, people for a while literally were like, Homer didn't write all of this because it has gone down through so many oral traditions and so much time has passed between the time that it was actually first sung, and because it was a ballad. That was the poetry of the time. And the time that we actually wrote it down, and then whether it was translated or not, whatever your rendition is, it looks like so many people have had their fingers on that song because they did. It was an oral history. It was a story that was told, and every bard knows that there are times to tell exactly what you heard, and there are times to read the crowd and add something to make them more interested or something to make them want to fill your cap with a few more coins. And that is the type of things that oral history does. It fascinates me. It fascinates me a lot. But looks like we're wrapping up here. I'm just about done here with this little guy. This little fluffer. Let's give him his little sardonic grin there. Unironic grin. And I really do love the cultures that I study and the people of the world and how we come to our things. And part of me wants to dissect and figure out where the stories first came from. Like Odin, the way it's written, it almost just sounds like there were several different tribes and the Asgardians were one of them. But at the same time, there's part of me that goes, these are cultural monoliths. These are things that become something more because of what they are. And that is why I draw fantasy. That's why I draw creatures like I draw them. It's why I like to write and use the fairy tales as if they are the history. Whether they are or not, they are within the worlds that I create. And frankly, probably more of the time than we believe they are actually part of it. I mean, just wrapping up with one last vampire thing. One of the things about a vampire is that it is warded off by garlic. It isn't necessarily physical, and it haunts and feeds on the rest of the family in turn after it dies. It's part of why they were so scary. And when you write down it all together, it sounds like a plague. It sounds like disease. A vampire was the embodiment of the horror of death that surrounded the medieval time period. A vampire is scary. A vampire is a cultural embodiment of death. And frankly, that's probably why we're not scared of them anymore. What do our dead look like? We aren't one of the cultures that sees eviscerated corpses. We see these pretty little things that are dressed up in their Sunday best. We see very little that is disgusting or putrid. The few times that we do are usually within movies, because we are a culture that is very much divorced from death. And that's why our vampires are different, because our culture has changed. Whether for the good or the bad, that's up to each individual to decide, but we are something new. Now, before I lacquer this down, I'll have to go through it with a with a kneaded eraser to clean it up a little bit, but this little guy's my dragon. And I hope you guys liked me watching me draw and hearing me rant somewhat. So, this is XelaSaysYay, signing out. Say bye, Esther.
Bye, Esther.
Alright, see you guys later.